All right, welcome everybody to the 17x podcast. It's great to have another opportunity to bring the talk series back to our platform. Many of you that have been following the podcast for a little while now know that every year we have our talk panel discussions where I grab some amazing humans from the 17x community to come through and talk about lessons that we can take from the year that was. Most recently, maybe 6 weeks ago, we had our talk 22 podcast where my co-host Paul Dunn from B1G1 jumped on and we had a great discussion about what happened last year and what lessons we could take. And we're now expanding the talk series to be able to bring more experts and more of the 17x community together to tap into, their experience, their roles, obviously their businesses and their experience on how we can start, moving the needle with some of these things. And today's conversation is talk Climate 13, so all about SDG13, just out of frame there. And I've got three amazing guests who I'm going to get to interview them, introduce themselves in a second, where we can really start to unpack climate, what's going on with the climate piece right now, particularly here in Australia. We'll get some definitions as well to help us understand what's actually going on at the most basic level so that we're all on the same page. And we've got some great opportunities to tap into three great 17x people that I've been able to meet through our community, from science through to research, through to tech startup, and of course what's going in the broader climate space. So that's enough for me. Let's get into it. I'm going to ask our amazing guests to introduce themselves. I'm just going to go clockwise from mine. So Vanessa, if you can kick us off, 30-second intro. Who are you? And welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Mick, for having me. Yes, my name is Vanessa Rauland. I'm the founder and the CEO of Climate Clever. And Climate Clever is a tech platform startup that helps businesses, schools and households to accurately measure their carbon footprint and take actions to reduce. And yeah, prior to that, sort of background in academia, did my PhD around decarbonising the cities and regions, and sort of fell into academia for a decade around climate policy before wanting to turn that sort of research into action with the business. That's me.
Great, thanks Vanessa. Super grateful to have you here. We've finally got you on the podcast. We've been talking about this for a while. All right, next up, Cassandra. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mick. My name is Cassandra Starr. I'm a Honorary Principal Research Fellow at the University of Sydney, and the area of my expertise is around climate policy, particularly at that interface between how policy is formed and then how different groups jostle around policy and try and shift where it goes, where it doesn't go. A lot of the work that I do with the group that I do research with, which is the Climate and Sustainability Policy Research Group, is working with governments and local communities about how to make climate policy better. How do we get better outcomes?
You're on mute, Mick.
Hey, there we go. It's going. Is it in the dictionary yet? Hey, you're on mute. I think that's one of the things that gets out. Thank you, Charlotte. So we got two PhDs in the room today, which I'm super psyched and unpacking as well. And Charlotte, last but not least, welcome back to the show, mate.
I knew you'd do this. I saw the lineup and I was like, I'm always the least clever person on a panel. And you have not disappointed this time, Mick. It's such an honour to be on this podcast with you, Vanessa and Cassandra. And of course, Mick, you and I with our fellow non-PhDers. So I have founded 2 children and yet to experience the return on investment on them. No, they're wonderful. But I have been solo parenting this weekend, so I'm at my wit's end. I look after the community of Climate Salad, which is one of Australia's leading and largest climate tech networks. And it's really great to see. I mean, I saw this. We didn't think climate was strong enough to have its own particular sector across tech or startups, but we now have over 800 members, 400 climate tech companies. Vanessa is part of that community. All the climate tech investors, as well as ecosystem supporters. So it's really great to see that there's so much momentum in this space. As my fellow panelists on the line would know, working in that climate space has felt like an uphill battle for so long, but now there's this momentum towards it. It's not just ripples anymore. It's huge waves coming in, and it's a climate tech revolution. This is like the digital revolution of the noughties. It's climate tech is here to stay, and it's here to solve customer problems and hopefully save us and our one and only home.
Love it, Charlotte. And hey, I'm going to take that you're a founder. I'm a founder of 2 children as well. I want to add that into my title. That's great. We've got founders and kids everywhere. That's unreal. Charlotte, it's great to have you here. You know, Climate Salad, you guys are doing some amazing stuff, and it's I think the insights into tech and what's going on, investment, I'm keen to hear about that. So Cassandra, I'd love to start with you, please. I want to start with some definitions. It's really basic so that we're all on the same level. Can you just give us, I guess, the starting point 101? What is climate? What is climate change? And what is the actual basis of the challenge that we're faced with right now?
Yeah, so when we're talking about climate change and what we would like to reduce or fix in terms of that, we're talking about human impact on climate, changes that are not within the natural system. So we are talking about interventions that we've made through our actions, like industry, like deforestation, that have changed what we would normally expect the baseline of the climate to be. And most of the time we're talking about carbon dioxide emissions, though there are other elements to it. So methane is also an addition to the climate, which changes the way we would expect it to act.
Right. And so one of the things that many of us would have seen at David Attenborough's intro at COP, I think it was at COP 26, and he talked about carbon and a specific number around parts per million. And the number that we had was, I've got it here, 414. And that's the critical number that we need to move the needle on. What's the science telling us around that?
So, you know, there's this really interesting story from some of the climate activists at COPs, you know, decades ago,
yeah.
Who there was a bit of a sort of a statement that they made, having tattooed on themselves what the parts per million were when they were born. So people of sort of your and my vintage, you know, we were born around 360 parts per million or so, and we're well past 400 now, which was a place where people thought, you know, we're really in dangerous territory if it ever goes past that.
Right.
But we're well past 400 now. I think it's sort of in the 420s.
Yeah.
So obviously the real aim of the game is to be moving that number down.
Right. Okay. And so why is climate change? Vanessa, go for it. Jump in.
I was just going to add to that to say why we were so worried about the 400 reaching and breaching the 400 parts per million mark is because it's the first time in human history that we've actually gone past that level. So the world has had higher levels of carbon dioxide in the past, but not since humans have been on the planet. So it is really uncharted territory for us, and that's, I think, what's so scary. You know, it's now going to create those tipping points, which we don't necessarily know what's going to happen. It's can cascade into various things that could go, you know, it could go into an ice age, or we could go into, you know, hotter climates, and, you know, all sorts of. So I think that's what's so scary about the 400 ppm.
There's a great segue into my next question there, Vanessa, which was coming to you, was around, there is a bit of unknown, but what is, I guess, the basic understanding as to the impact of this increasing number and where we're headed? There seems to be different opinions out there. What is, again, just kind of leaning back on the science, what is the science telling us? A very layman's understanding of, if we don't change, what's going to happen?
I think this one's actually very easy to answer. We've seen so many of the impacts of climate change so vividly in the last couple of years. The fires, the floods, the cyclones, you know, and sea level rise. All of these things that we're experiencing right now, which are getting more and more frequent, as you know, a lot of people, especially in these you know, flood-prone areas, are witnessing. This is the start of what's going to happen. I mean, I think we're sitting at 1.2 or 1.3 degrees of warming at the moment, and that's already what we're seeing. And what we're, you know, I'm sure this is Cassandra's area, but what the policies and stuff have where they're getting to us is far beyond sort of 2 degrees at this point, because we haven't made strong enough policies and or commitments. So we're going to see just so much, all of these events that we're already experiencing just in so much worse and more frequently. So yeah, our children, I've got a 2-year-old, they're going to live in a very, very different world when they grow up. And
so with this whole climate piece, we get the words carbon positive or carbon, net zero get thrown around a lot. What I know, Climate Clever and a lot of what you work in, Vanessa, is around bringing urban development into net zero, and what does that actually mean? What does net zero mean, or what does carbon positive mean for us?
So, well, to start with, maybe carbon neutral, because that's probably the most common term that's not thrown around, that is used. That basically means you calculate your carbon footprint, and whether it's a home or a business, and then you should be taking steps to reduce, but you can basically offset all, like 100% of your carbon footprint to become carbon neutral. So that's sort of been a relatively easy option for a lot of people to do. You can kind of do it overnight if you've got the funds to do so. And those offsets are, things like tree planting or other activities, switching lights in India, or so various things. But it's basically taking steps outside of your own kind of control to go back to zero. Net zero, and particularly under the Science Based Targets Initiative, they released sort of a net zero definition. Maybe it was 1.5 years ago now, but they basically, it's trying to eliminate fossil fuels from your organisation or your own footprint. So if you're a business and you have a fleet of petrol cars, you'll never be able to get to net zero. You have to transition them out to electric vehicles. They have to be charged by renewable energy. So everything sort of within your control that's fossil fuel based has to be switched out. And then they sort of recommend that you only offset like 10% of your overall footprint. So that's why that net zero target is often quite a fair way in the future, because it's a lot harder and more costly to get there that quickly. If you think of the big businesses with hundreds or thousands of trucks or whatever it is, it's sometimes the technology is not there, and sometimes it's just a really expensive process. So yeah, net zero is often sort of talked about maybe 2040, 2050. I certainly hope that we can get that a lot sooner. And then I guess climate positive, carbon positive, carbon negative, there's so many different words that get thrown around, and I guess all of them are just saying that you're doing more than necessary to get to, you're beyond net. You're actually having a positive contribution to the climate.
Yeah, great. So thanks for that, Vanessa. And then Charlotte, you mentioned in your intro there that we're in a bit of a boom with the climate tech, and this is a new space for us, and we are seeing that it's here to stay. With your community and what you're seeing in the green tech and the climate tech space, are you seeing these technology companies and opportunities come through with a science-based approach with these types of definitions and critical numbers being included in their plan and what they're here to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So climate tech, and just to give because we're definitions here, I'll give a definition of climate tech as well, because there is this concept or perception that it's just clean tech rebranded, like 2.0. It's so broad. So climate tech we view as climate solutions, scalable climate solutions using technology. And those solutions can be in mitigation, so avoiding, reducing, and removing carbon dioxide equivalent from the atmosphere. But it can also be in adaptation, because our climate has changed and is continuing to change. So a good example of that would be like Flood Map, born out of Brisbane, that uses geospatial planning data and precipitation data to accurately predict where flood levels will rise to. So that's an adaptation solution. So yes, deep tech climate solutions are coming out of research and into from universities and commercializing. They are not considered climate tech solutions unless they are actually, providing those adaptation or mitigation solutions. It's not just eco and friendly and we like it. Like, they are solving the biggest challenge we've had. But they have to, and this is the difference between like philanthropic solutions and climate tech solutions. There is very much that it has to be solving customer problems. So yes, they're based in science, they're actually having an impact, but they have to have demand for it, and it cannot require sophisticated behavior change for them to scale. There has to be this demand for your solution. And what Vanessa and Cassandra have alluded to is that there are policy changes now. There are, the science-based target initiatives that's increasingly being taken up. People are, like companies like Microsoft, they're not just wanting to become carbon neutral, but they want to go back and offset and replace, contribute to solutions for all of the emissions they've ever produced. So we're seeing a lot of this voluntary demand for, and leaders wanting to demand these climate solutions. We'll get to a stage where it's not just, the visionary leaders doing this, it'll be everyone, because the policies will match where the demand is. So it'll be like regulatory requirements for these solutions as well.
Yeah, sure.
Climate tech is broad, it's huge. Another great climate tech solution is GoTerra. That's hardware and software together, where they use black soldier fly larvae to rapidly digest food waste. So, reducing the carbon emissions from food digestion, but then using the soldier fly larvae, the black soldier fly larvae for feedstock. So it's this beautiful circular solution. And then there's this great fertilizer from that too. So, and you wouldn't think, is that climate tech? It's yes, that's climate tech. And it's maggots and it's farming. So that's a great climate solution, because you always think, oh yeah, solar farms and wind farms, but there is so much. Decarbonization touches everything we do.
Yep.
So it's pretty exciting. I can seem overly optimistic, but it's because I'm immersed in all the solutions.
Yeah, sure. Well, I can imagine that you, like me, in these networks that we get to play in, you'd come across some absolutely fascinating innovation in your space, right? And some of the founders in your network, like you say, using maggots and fly larvae to change the scope. And interestingly, you talk there about the link between, the policy and what the market is requesting. There's that collaboration approach. What's happening there at the moment, Cassandra, around having policy work with industry and business? Is there a collaboration approach happening yet, or are we a bit behind the 8 ball there? Are they still separated? Where are we at with that crossover of policy and the market all working together?
Well, I think we're in a really interesting space there, because we've just come out of a what you might call a dead decade of climate policy in this country. And really, most of the change that we'd seen in that decade either was happening at the state government level rather than the Commonwealth government level, or was happening in the business space. And we certainly have seen a number of key players in different industries pushing that envelope out front, well ahead of policy and regulation. And one of the main reasons why we've seen that, there definitely are companies where that's an altruistic response, that's a commitment that they've made separate from regulation or demand. But there's also consumer demand in a lot of spaces for this. So our communities are asking for more than what the policy response has been. And I think that's changing. The Labor government at the Commonwealth went into the federal election with a particular commitment. Most people would argue that commitment is insufficient at the moment. That the targets that they might be wanting to reach are a little lower than is best, but it's a very big change from where we were before.
Sure.
And there's a number of other policy responses that are coming up underneath that now, which I think will also push that up further. And obviously that regulatory change is in response to community demand, which is really clearly there, but also it will pull up innovation in the business community, and it will provide certainty for companies to develop further and invest further in this space, which I think is a really good virtuous circle.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a researcher, are you seeing the circle of research contributing to the policy and then coming out the other side? Yep.
Definitely. And I have to say that's one of the really big things, without revealing too much, but over my lifetime that I've seen, when I first went into research and then into academia, very few people were working on climate change in the non-scientific space. And now there's so much work going on, including around business and around finance and the economics of that, in the policy space, but also in a whole range of other areas as well. Like looking at what the impacts will be on cultural heritage, on archaeology, etc. So it has grown into, you know, an ecosystem of its own in a way. How much research is going on because of the scale and importance of the problem now and the recognition of that.
Yeah, sure. That's huge. Sorry, Vanessa, you want to jump in?
Can I just jump in quickly on the policy side?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, well, first of all, yeah, it was very depressing working in academia the last decade in climate policy because, yeah, and I had to basically change my presentation slides each year when we had something, we didn't have something, and we had something else, and none of it was really that useful. But the exciting point that we are at is, as Cassandra said, you know, we've got a change in government. It's sending a very clear signal to businesses that, you know, there's the talk of that mandatory disclosure for some of the bigger businesses as well. But what we're finding at Climate Clever is a lot of the businesses that we're starting to work with, which are very much sort of in the infrastructure and resources space, construction, a lot of these businesses are working, these are very much the SME sort of side of the world, the small to medium businesses. They are increasingly getting pressure from their clients, which are the bigger businesses that are facing those policies and regulations and legislation, but more international legislation, which is asking them to disclose their scope 3 or their supply chain emissions if they want to trade internationally and stuff. So there's definitely feels like the policy and regulation is starting to sort of trickle down and influence particularly businesses, which is obviously we all need to take action, but it would have a huge impact if a lot more businesses did start to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And Vanessa, can you just unpack a little bit for the audience listening what Climate Clever actually does? Because we get a lot of you know, the kind of 101 question of, well, where do I start, or what can I do? I'm just a small business. Do I actually move the needle in any of this if I'm, you know, if I'm doing my bit? And I think one of the great things about Climate Clever is, you know, a very simple piece of tech that's really around that measurement piece, right? And, you know, how do you measure? You don't know how to move and improve something if you don't have the data, right? Can you just give a bit of a snapshot on what you actually do with Climate Clever? And whilst you're there, can you also just go into maybe explaining what the carbon offsets are all about, and how do they, you know, help us make some changes?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so you're 100% right. This is what is, I guess, stumping a lot of businesses from getting started, is just that, oh, it seems too hard or complicated or expensive, and that's what does put a lot of businesses off from getting started. I guess the traditional approach to carbon accounting, so doing a footprint, was, you know, using Excel spreadsheets, and it was a very manual and time-consuming process, and therefore could be quite expensive. It was often done by consultants, and still is to a large degree, and it is actually a very complicated thing to do. So there are some great consultants out there that can help you on that process. But what we were finding is often the consultants didn't want to work with small businesses because it's too small, and it takes more time to do for them than they can really afford to pay. So that's where we were really trying to jump in and provide like an affordable, streamlined approach for the small businesses to get started on their own. So basically through the platform, they can enter their data from utility bills and say flights and any company vehicles, so the petrol that's used. That's what we sort of call activity data. So it's not, we don't use sort of assumptions or ask great basic like broad questions. We really try and use the actual data that's of energy or fuel or anything consumed in the organisation, and then we calculate that footprint. We also track it throughout the year, so they can actually go in and start to see the impact of any actions that they start to take as well. We also have an action section to the platform, and that my whole mission and purpose for creating Climate Clever was not just to create a carbon calculator or a reporting tool, but it was actually to help the businesses on that decarbonisation journey. So there's an action plan part in there as well, which they can choose from a bunch of actions, and or, you know, speak to us or anyone else and help to manage that. And then they can offset through our platform as well. But as Charlotte mentioned before, there's another fantastic company, Trace, out there that also, I think they maybe do more so with the offsets. We've just partnered with and a third party. They're called South Pole. So if businesses wanted to offset, they can. They don't have to though. And then they can generate a report, which is really needed for that sort of credibility piece, in particular to avoid greenwashing, which is starting to become more and more prevalent, just because it's a growing field, as in climate is a growing field, which is great. But just to make sure that when people are saying we're carbon neutral or we're this or we're that they've got the sort of the evidence or the backup to say this is how it's been calculated. This is what was included in our boundaries. And again, what we always say to businesses, it's better to get started than put it off. So even if you start with a smaller boundary and then you can expand your boundary over time, I think scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions confuses a lot of people. It's, it's a new vocabulary, and so just trying to, I guess, simplify it to get people started on that journey is the most important thing. Now, you asked a bunch of questions and I've forgotten the rest of them.
The other one, I mean, feel free, anyone can jump in on this one, but the carbon offset, right? What is it? It goes to definitions. It's another term that we hear get thrown around, and I've been hearing more so of late, investigate the carbon offsets, make sure they're the right ones. Are they doing what they say? Now it's becoming almost a commodity trade to a lot. There's this kind of thing going on in the background with some of it. So again, baseline, what is a carbon offset? How do we actually audit that? Do we know what we're doing? Is planting a tree a carbon offset? Anyone feel free to jump in, but I know, Vanessa, you talk about linking to carbon offsets, but yeah, what are they? What's this all about?
I'll have a first step, but I'm definitely sure these two ladies would love to jump in and maybe even correct me. But yeah, basically an offset is something that you're doing outside of your organisation to reduce the impacts of your organisation. And like you just said, they could be from a range of things like tree planting, which is absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, through to projects which avoid the carbon being produced in the first place, and that can be like various technologies. They usually have to go through a very, very stringent and rigorous methodology to be accepted to be a project that can generate these offsets. But you're right, it's a commodity. It's the carbon market. It's becoming extremely commoditized, and also that has also led to some unscrupulous providers out there as well, and not enough checks and balances. And there was a great horrible Four Corners episode maybe a couple of months ago that was talking about one of the big global standards that was supposed to be verifying these projects. And the investigator went into, I think it was Papua New Guinea, and actually went and looked at the trees that were supposedly being protected, and they were actually being cut down. So yes, you do need to do your homework into it. I think there's a general trend also away from offsets. Even what we've sort of found with some of our clients is that, you always have to weigh up the costs that you might, if your footprint's relatively big, you might end up spending, $20,000 to $50,000 on offsets, or you can invest that money into solar panels or something that's going to reduce your footprint immediately on site inside your organisation. So I think there's a lot of conversations people are having now around, is it better to spend the money on the offsets, or is it better just to keep hammering away at reducing your own footprint internally? And I'm probably for the former, for the latter, that's what everyone says. You try and reduce yours first, but it's just often a lot easier just to go, but we'll just purchase the offsets. And I think we do need to invest a lot more in reducing internally first. Absolutely. But yeah, Charlotte and Cassandra, jump in.
I guess in terms of carbon offsets, from that broader global perspective and from a policy perspective, the bigger question is, are we making sure that this represents an actual reduction in carbon emissions? Because that's ultimately what we're trying to do. So I would agree with Vanessa that, looking for the reductions internally rather than just paying for offsets is the preferable way to go where you can, because at the end of the day, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the reduction in carbon emissions, or we're not actually achieving what we're trying to do. It's an illusion.
Sure. Charlotte?
Yeah, I just want to, and the maturity of the offset and, your climate and carbon footprint, because I would personally offset what I couldn't reduce through Trace, a climate tech company with high integrity offsets, because I felt guilty about that. But I also wasn't, I didn't have access to that impact investing space as well. And I think it's even like the maturity of impact investing and climate climate impacts as well, because it was always about negative screenings, like, okay, so don't invest in fossil fuels or don't do harm. But as we see that mature, it's not just about, and it's not good enough to just have a negative screen. We have to contribute to solutions. So even just my personal journey with that has gone from offsetting what I can't reduce to, you know, and I have solar and we do all those things as much as possible. But now for the same amount I used to offset, I now put into Bloom Impact, another climate tech company, to impact invest. So it's, you know, $20 a month, basically. I just, you know, I like to contribute to those solutions and support those companies creating solutions and making an impact. And we see that too, you know, a really great way that we can all become impact investors, which was the theme of Earth Day on Saturday, is it like, even with that super, it's like Australia's super is the 4th largest pool of pension in the world. And we don't even need more than 10% of it. We only need about 7.2% of it to fund renewables, to be able to fund the entire transition. So it's like, you know, there's all these things of like, but who will pay for it? How? And it's like, we have the mechanisms in place, you know, like we're all sitting on the power to invest in these solutions. So, you know, you don't have to be like, you know, a finance broker who's like been investing a long time on, I don't know what the equivalent of Wall Street is in Australia. You don't even need a lot of money to invest in these solutions. It's really accessible and attainable.
I like that you talked about maturity of investing there, because presumably through climate sale, we see a lot of, you know, the link between the tech world and impact in kind of, I guess, green investing even, of more money starting to flow into not just climate tech, but really purpose-driven agendas across the board. Are you, what's the landscape of that right now in your world, Charlotte, around the investment space? Yeah. I mean, I like that you said we only need about 7.2%. Sounds like you've done the research there.
I did UTS. UTS did research on that. No, I just quote research. I don't do it. You're the clever in the room that do it. Look, climate tech is absolutely hot. Like it's super, super hot. And out of the, you know, Cut Through Ventures did this report of the Australian startup landscape, and the number-1 sector that all investors are most excited about, most interested in, is climate tech. And the next was AI, which was half, like 61% were interested in climate tech, only 30 in AI. And think about how the explosion of chat GPT, but they're more interested in climate tech because they see, I mean, and investors, you know, they're about making a return. They're not about saving the planet, but they can see a return. Last year, Hall and IQ produced this research that last year there was a climate tech unicorn, and a unicorn in startup world is a company valued at $1 billion valuation. There was a climate tech unicorn created every 2 weeks.
Wow.
When all the sectors were slowing down, climate tech wasn't. It's the last sector to be affected by the economic downturn. So it's not just great for our planet, it's actually a really exciting industry for investors. We did a climate tech industry report last year, and we found that climate tech within Australia, most companies are only 3 years old, but they had attracted $1.4 billion of investment, and half of that came from overseas, created 4,000 jobs with another 2,000 in the pipeline. So this is not just, you know, protest, picket fences, we should do this for the planet. It's like, you can make a lot of money from this. So that's getting the business community on side, and that's getting everyone else to go, oh, okay, this is a good area to be part of. And that's okay if you, even if you don't necessarily want to save the planet, I probably don't want to have a coffee with you, but I want you on board because we need everyone on board.
Yeah.
Save our planet.
And hey, the transition to business needs to be there, right? And so you can't run a business without money. The balance between the two, happy days, let's go and make it happen, right? It doesn't.
Yeah, we're going to need, like, capitalism got us into this climate change disaster, catastrophe. Yeah. And I do feel it's going to be a huge part of the solution. But we need government. We need really good policies. We need amazing researchers like Cassandra and Vanessa there to push and advocate for those changes. And then we need philanthropic donations to fund the charities and the organizations that are working on the ground to change those behaviors and do that really important advocacy work too. So, you know, we don't just need business, we need everyone on board.
Vanessa?
I 100% agree with that, 110% agree with that. But I would like to say that just in terms of businesses, I would really like to see a few more big businesses step up and really lead the way and encourage everyone else, because I feel like there's so often an excuse I get from businesses that I guess are considering it, and it's sort of in the back of mind, they're like, but we're not going to do it until we have to do it. And I just think it would be great to see some big businesses going, no, this is what we all should do. And policies and regulations are also good as well. But businesses have so often led the way in actually positively addressing climate change. So I think it'd be nice to see if a few more sort of step up and go, no, this is actually a priority, and I do want to invest in the future.
If we gave you the magic wand and maybe the badge to go in there and police them, what's the first thing you tell these big businesses to do? Let's put them on check. What's the number one thing they need to start with in your mind? Yeah, go. Vanessa, you're on. Yeah, go.
Okay.
So you're saying that we need a big business to step up, and we absolutely do. Yeah. They need to be part of the innovation track. They got the funding, the distribution, they got the network. Yeah. The SME world and the startup world have the innovation, they have the agility, and we've now come out of our dead decade, and we're now getting policy catch up. These big businesses, if we gave you a magic wand and be the badge of authority to walk in there and butt them head, what's the number one thing you get them to work on? Okay, you're right. First thing you got to do, it is go.
It's okay. It would be set an actual ambitious and realistic, not realistic because we need to be ambitious, but no, realistic target, but not something that's 2050. That's too far away. We need to, and for a lot of big businesses, they're like, that's like 10 predecessors from me. It's so far out of my control. So something that some really strong, ambitious interim targets. I think it'd be great to see them really start to think about their supply chains and start to put a little bit more pressure on at least starting that reporting journey, but also supporting their suppliers to decarbonise. I think that's, a lot of these small businesses are already under pressure, and I think that these larger companies do have the resources. They're making billions and billions of dollars in profit. Like, they could actually be putting some of this money towards actually helping their suppliers, which make their business, viable, to go on this journey, this path as well. But I'm going to throw over and handball to Cassandra, because what if you had a magic wand?
That's a really dangerous question to ask me always. I might be slightly less optimistic about big business than my other two colleagues here on the panel. I think most often what we tend to see is big business it's really hard to turn the ship. And part of that is because they have sunk investment in the status quo. I think that the big changes that we'll see will come from more nimble, smaller businesses or medium businesses. And actually big business is where regulation is going to be so important. I mean, if we look at our sort of international profile of where emissions come from, 80% of emissions come from really quite a small number of very large, very wealthy international companies. So they are not going to be the ones who are going to change. It's going to be others around them, because they're way too committed to the profits that are coming from the way things are now. Yeah, so sure. I would use regulation.
But we
bring on the regulation.
Yeah, we need regulation, but we also, that disruption is what gets me out of bed in the morning. It's the innovators creating those solutions. And it wasn't that long ago that Canva was a small company, and we look at the impact they made. So Australia is often known, and I'm from Newcastle, the largest coal exporting port in the world, and we're often known as the largest coal exporting country in the world. So although our country's emissions are small, what we export, biggest. But we are actually number one in the world for the most efficient producers of unicorns. It takes less capital to get a lot more from these small, like micro startups, into huge, big juggernaut companies. So I see this as climate tech has a huge opportunity in Australia. Like, imagine if we start disrupting that status quo, that $11.9 billion of subsidies that goes to the fossil fuel industry. Imagine that funneled into the innovation sector to accelerate, research into impactful businesses, to help those startups, cross the valley of death and get into something that we can all adopt. Like, we're sitting on, dare I say, a gold mine of opportunity. And even just that, like the critical minerals we have in Australia, we could be a superpower for the critical minerals. Like, we're going to have to keep doing mining, but we have We have all of what we need here. We have great innovators. We have great tech. We don't need as much capital as other countries to create big businesses. Like, oh my God, what an opportunity to be missed if we don't get into this sunrise industry of climate solutions.
Well said.
I love how lit up you are when you talk about that, Charlotte. Your eyes are.
But it is. But it's like it's, you know, these businesses, and, you know, Vanessa knows this, being in WA, they're booming, they're doing really well, and they have for so long, and they don't like disruption. They don't like being not the big boys in town anymore. And I always think about the founders of Netflix trying to sell to the founder, to Blockbuster CEO, and they're like, you could buy our DVD subscription service for 50 million. And he laughed them out of the room. And it's like, where's Blockbuster now? And look at Netflix. It's like, we're at that moment. We're at that moment in time right now. Like, let's stop getting our money into fossil fuel industries because it's sunset. And let's go into the big business that has like blue sky opportunities in so many.
Can I just, the nerdy academic in me wants to know, why does it take less capital for Australian businesses to become unicorns?
I do want to know exactly. I haven't drilled down into that. That's from Airtree. I wonder if it's because the Australian dollar is so bad compared to the US. But I think it's also because they work harder. There's not as much capital to go around, so they work a lot harder for it. They have to prove traction. They have to, like, you know, win over the customers here. And Australia's a really good sandpit to play in. Like, you know, there's Coca-Cola, McDonald's. Sorry to bring up those brands, but you know, they play in the sandpit in Australia. They test out product innovation here. And if it does well here, they go, oh, it's going to do brilliantly everywhere. So that could be a lot of the reasons behind it. And I'm just, you know, I'm just guessing here, but could be a bad Australian dollar, but it also could be that our innovators just work so much harder for that capital because there's not as much to go around.
If you think about, I think there's a real base, and this would just be my guess as well, that I see there's a real base of innovation in Australia. You see, particularly with, you know, the sub 40, I don't even know what you call them. I think I'm a generation Z maybe, but whatever the sub 40s are, I think you're seeing this really highly intelligent, highly in tune, tech enabled, creative humans coming out with these innovative products. And I think there's a groundswell of real talent here in Australia that's coming out, and you're getting that crossover of research, and the science is catching up. And we're starting to push away some of that ideology around how we're creating innovative solutions that are solving problems that can then scale internationally. I've got a real belief in particularly the young people of Australia, with the leadership of people like you guys, and the communities and sandpits that you play in. And now what that's doing for the next generation, I think we'll see an even bigger boom, Charlotte, come out of Australia that will scale around it. You know, we'll have 10 more Canvas in the next few years, and it's just going to go.
And I do, just jumping in that around the next generation, I so often get that comment in meetings I have with businesses that want to get started, is that they recognise that they actually do need to move with the times if they're going to continue to attract and retain staff. Like, particularly the millennials and everyone who's coming through, they're just more values aligned. They're looking for businesses that they feel like, yeah, they can work with, and they're being pickier and choosier about who they're going to go work for. So I think that's a really nice trend to kind of guilt a lot of businesses into doing the right thing as well. Not guilt, but, you know, then that's an economic decision. Hey, we can do that. So if we want staff.
Absolutely. Look, guys, we're getting close to the end of our time. One thing I did want to ask Cassandra, and I love it that you talked about the dead decade that we've just come out of. Because one of the things that I heard Bill Gates talk on a podcast a little while back when he was probed about climate action or climate change, around what can the individual do? So stepping even away from the business side of things, and what can we as individuals do to move the needle? And the number one thing that he said is, you've got to vote. You have to put your vote in the right spot, because governments need to be a part of this to fund the innovation that's required, and, you know, the policy and everything else. So having seen that you've come out of this dud decade, and we've now got, whilst, as you said, maybe not a strong enough policy, but we've got a policy and we're moving in the right direction. Do we back up what Bill Gates said? How important is our vote? Does it actually play in contributing to the change of policy?
Well, I think, you know, he was definitely talking about the US context where it's not required.
Sure. Yeah.
But here in the Australian context, your vote is a say about a whole collection of policies. So actually the more effective thing, I think, often is to send an email or a letter to your local MP. This is a really important issue to me. Here are the things that I think that should be improved. MPs are used to seeing lots of sort of copy and paste kind of emails or communications from people, often through social movements. But the one that's, actually you saying what you think is really important. So for me, it's not about the vote exactly, but it's about the pressure that you put on our, elected officials. And, we've seen the effectiveness of that. The teal movement in Australia put pressure on the Labor Party to lift their ambition a bit.
Yep.
And that is still happening within Parliament with them and a number of other independents who are saying we need to have more ambition on climate. So, I always say to people that, yes, your footprint as an individual matters, but actually when we look at where the majority of emissions come from, it is our pressure on government to regulate those small, really it's a couple of dozen really large emitters, that is the most powerful thing that you can do. If you've got, 1 hour a month that you can spend on something like this, that's the most valuable thing that you can do.
Yeah, love it. Thank you. So before we finish up, I'd love to just shine the spotlight on each of you on some of the great things that you're doing, and the inspiration certainly that you give me, and 17x, we're growing along with you. What's on for this year, 2023? We're already a third of the way through the bloody thing, but we've got nearly a year ahead of us. It'd be great. Let the audience know what's happening in the rest of your 2023, and what can people look out for. Charlotte, do you want to kick off? What's going on for you this year, and what can people look out for to get around with you and Climate Salad?
Sure. I mean, just personally, I'm turning 40, so that's a real milestone. Woohoo! But it also makes me realize, like, I have got to dedicate the rest of this life, which will be long and prosperous, I'm sure, to impact. And I feel like we have the solutions, and we're helping them to grow and to scale. But what we need is to mobilize finance towards them. And we need to, fulfill those global ambitions. So with Climate Salad, we have 4 international trade missions this year, which is so fantastic. And also as part of my role at Climate Salad, and personally, I'm helping out as an advisor for StartMate's Climate Tech Fellowship. Wow. So I think everyone thinks when, to work in climate, you need to be the genius, like the ones on the calls today, Vanessa and Cassandra, to be the ones that come up with the amazing ideas. Sorry about that. That's my next call. I'm coming through. But there are so many skills needed. There are so many job opportunities. Look for a climate tech company or a climate solution you love, buy from them, invest in them, or, roll up your sleeves and get involved with them. So I think we can all play our part, and you don't have to be a climate scientist. You don't have to have worked in the industry for years. All the skills will be needed. So I'm just really excited about the movement towards it, like people coming towards it with all the skills and making those founders go further.
Love it. Love it. So Vanessa, what are you up to this year? What's going on at Climate Clever?
So we're really excited about diving deeper into this sort of resources and infrastructure space. For me, it's a little bit of a homecoming because my PhD was all around decarbonising cities and the built environment. And we partnered with Industry Capability Network last year. They've got 86,000 suppliers on their network that are doing work for some of these big clients. So really looking forward to sort of furthering how we can support those businesses that are really concerned and worried about how to get started. But going back to our roots, we started off as a platform for schools, and so if there's anyone out there that's listening to this that that if you've got kids at school that are wanting to get involved, our platform is absolutely suitable for the schools to start that journey. And we've also got a home version as well. So if you just wanted to get started, this year is definitely the year to do that. And yeah, I'm just really excited to see what does eventuate from a policy perspective, and just see a lot of great new startups, as Charlotte's been talking about, just emerge and flourish in this space.
Awesome. Thanks, Vanessa. Excited to be a part of it. Hey, all right, Cassandra, what are you up to this year?
So this year we're going through a bit of a consolidation year at CASPA. We're bringing out a number of sort of papers and guidelines, reports from work that we've been doing with local and state government, looking at climate adaptation, how to benchmark yourself if you're doing that compared to other jurisdictions around the world, and being able to look at where you're doing well and where you could improve. We're also doing some work looking at bushfire preparation and recovery for marginalised or challenging groups in the community who are often overlooked in this space. So looking at the elderly and the disabled in disaster situations. So I think the Northern New South Wales floods or the South Australian fires of 2019, 2020.
Yeah, great. Well, it's been a fascinating chat. Thank you so much for spending time with me today and giving up your precious time to be on the 17x podcast. We absolutely live and breathe through partnerships and collaboration, as you all know. So supremely grateful to have you all back. We will put links, everybody that's tuning into the podcast. If you scroll down in the show notes, you'll see LinkedIn links to these great people that you can connect with. We'll put Cassandra's personal phone number down there for all of your policy recommendations. Just kidding. But obviously we are here to connect and collaborate. So please, jump in, connect with these amazing leaders, do business with them. Check out their website, connect, and make it all happen. But thanks again for everyone for joining us. I appreciate you. I'm grateful, and thanks for being a part of the 17x community. Let's take SDG13 to new heights here this year.
And thank you, Mick, for building such a wonderful community.
Awesome. Cheers, Vanessa.
Thank you. Also, it was the dead decade, but now it's a decade of action. We are going to get there.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks.